Welcome to day 3 and the final day of GGSA's, or the Geography Graduate Student Association's, Climate Talks, titled Indigenous Wisdom and Perspectives on Colonial and Industrial-Induced Climate Change. This is an event sponsored by SDSU through the Student Success Fee. My name is Corey Monteverde, and I am a PhD student at SDSU, and I'll be the host for tonight. Our moderators for this 3-day event are Giorgio and Shasta. We are also joined by two panelists. Tonight we have Michael Durglo and Adam Osbekoff. Michael serves as the Tribal Historic Preservation Department head and has been a leader in climate change work for over a decade. So welcome, Michael. And we also have Adam, who works for the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and has worked for the department for about 13 years now. And we also want to point you to our webpage where we have a full Kumeyaay land acknowledgement statement. And we do want to recognize that we are on Kumeyaay ancestral and familial lands. In the interest of time tonight, we are going to go ahead and jump into our individual presentations from our panelists. And tonight we are going to have Michael Durglo present first. So at this time, I would like to welcome Michael to share his perspective and wisdom for us tonight. Michael?
Thanks, Corey, and thanks Graduate Students Association, Shasta, for inviting me, Giorgio, and what an amazing week it has been, right? Listening to Ed, I was just sharing earlier that we could have probably went till midnight last night at least, with some great sharing by James, and man, it's just been awesome. So I'm going to jump right in. I apologize because we work 4/10s, 7 to 5:30 Monday through Thursday, and I have to leave my office right at 5:30 because the cleaning people come in. So I'm going to start. Thank you. I'll share my screen. So my presentation is about biocultural restoration of white bark pine on the Flathead Indian Reservation. We started the white bark pine process, and white bark pine, for those of you who don't know, is a high elevation, very slow growing tree. And there's over 100 different animals that rely on those seed sources, including us as human beings, and it's part of our traditional food source. In the last probably century or so, there's been a mass die-off of white bark pine throughout the country. There's actually a national effort to restore white bark pine on some of our homelands and in the Northwest and other places. So we are located in Northwest Montana. The reservation is 1.3 million acres. So right up here, Polson, we're about 3.5 hours to Canada and about 2.5 hours to Idaho. Right in the smack dab middle of God's country. For those of you who have followed climate change, Glacier National Park is just north of us, a couple hours, and they're predicting that the glaciers in the Glacier National Park will be gone within the next 30 years. When we started the process of developing our climate strategy back in 2012, I felt it was very important that we included the traditional knowledge of our elders, my dad being one of those elders. And our lands and our resources are the basis for our spiritual life. Everything comes, and I've heard almost everybody that spoke this week talk about our connection to the land, to the Mother Earth, the air, the importance of the water's life. And all of our traditions and our customs depend on the abundant populations and the not just the abundance of them, but the health. Right now we're looking at some fish consumption limits on some of our lakes because of mercury in the fish. So, and I know that the coastal tribes, they have their clams and their shellfish that are very important to their spiritual life. So that is impacting all of us in some of our Aboriginal lands and our homelands with our food sources and our medicines. Cultural resources of the tribes are being lost, substantially altered or destroyed with increasing frequency. And we're seeing that on a more and more frequent basis. I mean, when I go up into the woods to hunt or fish or gather, I just see, it's kind of sad, but, I bring my family up. My dad, who's passed on, my grandfather, my grandmother brought us up to those places to gather our foods, our medicines. And some of those places are being very impacted. We all seen the devastation of the wildfires last year and, previous years, and how much that impacted our, I don't like to call them resources, but our relatives, right? Our relatives that are out there. We started the process of working on our plan. So right after Swinomish, I think you guys started, I don't remember, but we were one of the first tribes in the United States to develop a climate plan. At the time, a lot of tribes and others were calling them adaptation plans. And I attended a workshop up in Edmonton, Alberta, and most of the participants in that workshop were from around the tar sands area. And, when we mentioned to them about adapting, one of the elder women said, "You know what, Mike, I'm just sick and tired of having to adapt to all this," she said, "bullshit that's going on around us. We always have to adapt. In order to survive, we have to adapt." And they were talking about complete rerouting of migrating caribou herds. They have to take different routes from where they traditionally went because of impacts to the lichen, the food source that the caribou depend on. So this is this is kind of outdated. I think we all know that when we went through the process of developing our plan in 2012, 2013, the models and the graphs and all that we looked at, in my opinion, were somewhat conservative. We were hoping for the best, planning for the worst, but we know now, based on models and science, that these things are happening very much sooner than what we predicted back then. So we're in the process currently of rewriting our plan based on the new models and science that we're seeing and the increase in overall annual temperatures. So this, again, is part of that, the predictions and the science that we use, what we predicted back then to be happening in around 2050 is already happening now. Somebody mentioned the 100-year flood. We're seeing those on more of a, like, every 10 years now too. The 100-year flood, the 500-year flood, they're happening more frequent. And with the fires, pretty much all the erosion that comes off of the fires, the mudslides that, you're seeing in California and other places, we're seeing that here. This is Glacier National Park a couple of years ago. So we are experiencing these devastating wildfires. And, it's a multiple, is that the right word? There's several things going on, right? Climate change is a big factor. 150 years of fire suppression. I mean, we've all heard old Smokey Bear, say, "Only you can prevent wildfires." Did I sound like him? yeah. Thanks, Giorgio. Forever since I was a kid, that's what we heard, and it's like that was the way we were doing business, even here on the reservation. Although for us, we have used we have used fire as a tool, of a resource tool. So we have quite often early spring and late fall, we have controlled burns in certain areas. And in some of those areas, what's amazing is that I don't know if some of you guys have had camas. It's one of our main traditional foods. There's areas where, I hunted, I fished, I camped, and gathered in some of these areas. And then when the forestry program and the fire crew went and did a control burn there, the next spring it was just blue with camas. That whole prairie, it's called Jocko Prairie, and it's like I've never seen camas there in all my life until they burned it. So that they're there, they're waiting for that, that moment when things are right, that we make things right, and all these camas bulbs came popping out. So this biocultural restoration actually was I used to serve as the co-chair on the National Tribal Science Council. I've been working for the tribe for almost 40 years. Next year it's 40 years. Most of that time is in natural resources. Just recently, 6 years ago, I moved from natural resources to preservation. And I've heard many of the presenters say, you know what, cultural resources and natural resources are the same thing. And that's absolutely true. So biocultural restoration of white bark pine, not only ecosystems, but also humans and cultural relationships to place. And I've heard several people mention, and I feel the same way. It's the power of place. We go to these, our spiritual places, to pray, to meditate, to have our experiences. And I always tell people, you know what? You don't have to put your hands on the pictographs. Actually, don't do it, because it impacts them more. I mean, the one lady, I can't remember who it was, talked, that picture of was it petroglyphs or pictographs? But people were actually cutting them away. And she talked about people putting them in their yards, or, and I've seen people put them on their mantles, even bones and things like that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to read all these. You guys can read some of those. So, all week long, I've heard about the core tribal values. And I think a lot of us share those core values. And it's not, and I don't mean to just say that the tribal people have those core values. I know that Giorgio, Corey, and, all of us share that core because we're here, right? That's what brings us together in this like-minded venue, where we're sharing our stories, we're sharing our experiences, and we all feel that that connection to the land, the connection to the people, the connection to our relatives and our resources. Respecting the land, replacing what we take, reciprocity. How many of you have read Dr. Kimmer's Braiding Sweetgrass? And she talks about that connection to the land, how awesome and special that is. That's, for me, that's where we need to go back to. We're not really trying to indigenize everybody, but just to get back to that, respecting the land, being part of Mother Earth. And this actually is, I call it our Lifeways model. So each one of these represents a sector in our climate strategy. You can see wild forestry, air, land, people, infrastructure, water, fish, and wildlife. Each one of these are sectors, and you can check this out on csktclimate.org. But this image came from I called it my awake vision. One morning I woke up about 3 in the morning, and I had this image in my head about a pika. You guys know what pikas are? They're little cute little rodents that live at the top of the mountain, and they need cold. They live in the cold. And I seen that pika on the peak behind my house. I live right smack dab in the Rocky Mountains, and right behind my house, I seen a pika, and on the he was sitting on a rock, and that pika died. And when that pika died, there was a deer in the field behind my house, and she lifted her head up because she knew something in the sacred circle just happened. She wasn't, she didn't know what happened exactly, but she knew that something in the circle was taken out. Yesterday, I think somebody talked about what, anytime something is removed or anytime something is put into the sacred circle, it has a ripple effect. And that ripple effect goes out to the universe. That's what our elders talk about. Everything feels that ripple effect. And it's all connected. And in order for us to get back to that harmony that was talked about in the previous slides, we as human beings need to reconnect to that sacred circle. We have taken ourselves out of it. We have put ourselves over it. And we feel like, we control this. This is ours. This is mine. We need to put ourselves back into that sacred circle. And you know what? When that happens, it's going to take time for the circle to mend. I mean, we've all seen the impacts of every day, how many species go extinct. And every time that happens, the sacred circle is impacted. And so it takes, could take 100 years or so for that circle to mend. White bark pine, Skilposh, for us, these are the seeds of the white bark pine. We haven't, I have not tasted them. They have been not, I think that's true for a lot of our first foods, that even like myself and some of our children have not had the pleasure or it's more than that. It's the spiritual connection that we have to our foods. They have not had that experience. And this is something we're trying to bring back. Agnes Vandenberg, she ran a culture camp from spring till fall in Valley Creek. I love this lady. I was a game warden back then, and I'd stop by her camp every morning and visit with her. She taught a lot of people our ways and shared a lot of different foods. Great lady. We had an ongoing joke because there's a lot of times non-tribal people would stop by, and in the morning we'd have a glass of milk, and we told them it was elk milk. So it's really hard to catch an elk and milk it. Have you ever done it, Adam?
No, not yet.
Yeah. So I think part of the, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of you, I mean, we're talking to graduate students, how important it is to get our students and our children back on the land base. We bring these kids up in the mountains, and we show them the actual impacts of like blister rust and pine beetles, how that's affecting our white bark pine. And we teach them about the climate impacts, what's happening, and why is it important that we have those trees at the top of the mountain. for snowpack retention. It helps, slow down that water flow from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley, to the river, and to the ocean. And it keeps it pristine. If we don't have those trees, it comes crashing down, picks up all kinds of sediment, and it's just not good. So that's part of the reason why we're really, we are a timber resource tribe, just like Adam, right? You guys are timber tribe. We rely on that for our revenue. We were not so much the white bark pine because it's so high growing and slow, or high elevation and slow growing. It takes about 60 to 70 years for those trees, those seedlings, to actually start growing their own seeds. So I won't be here when the seed, or the little ones, the babies that they planted last year, I won't be here to see those come to maturity. But I'm not doing it for me, right? We're not doing this for us. We're doing it for the future. This is an old white bark pine. Obviously, it's not alive anymore, but I call this my medicine tree. And in my language, it's my adlauia. My adlauia means my great-great-grandparent. And when we took you can see how it's all on this rock scree slope. It's just, man, it's magnificent. And why we talked about this tree for a couple of years before I actually hiked up there and I got to touch it. So it's like, for me, it's almost like a medicine tree. And the kids, when we talked about that tree, we think this tree was about 2,000 years old. And, I told the kids, what stories could that tree tell us if the tree could tell us stories? And I said, it does. If we did a core sample in that tree, which we're not going to do because it's such a special tree, it'll tell us the drought years, the water years, the good years, the bad years, the fire years. It has all kinds of stories to tell us. So I invite all of you to come to Montana, and I'll bring you up to meet my adlauia someday. We're working with Salish Kootenai College with the Tribal Forestry Program and my office, Tribal Historic Preservation, to help restore and just share the cultural information with young people. And a lot of our tribal members have never experienced it either. Just some pictures of, they call these big die-off areas, they call it ghost forest. And you can Google ghost forest and you can watch a video clip in a minute about how devastating all this dead and dying white bark pine. They're 5-needle pines, actually. Limber pine, white bark pine, they're all high elevation trees. They go up in the springtime and they put cages on the cones so that they can mature over the summer, and then they go up and collect these cones in the fall to send them to the lab for genetic testing. There's the seeds. These are the babies. There's 30,000 baby white bark pines right there. The tribe grows these trees for others, BLM, Forest Service, and other people around us. So whoever's working on white bark pine restoration, this is one of our tribal greenhouses, and those are our babies. They have to grow in the greenhouse for about 2 years before we can bring them out and plant them. And when we do that, we have to find microsites. I don't know if any of you have experienced been a tree planter. It's hard work, and usually they just walk along with a thing and plant the trees in the ground as they walk. So a lot of the forest nowadays, you'll see them in lines, right? The trees growing in lines like corn or whatever. With white bark pine, we have to find microsites, and it's best grown in old burn areas. Here's the kids again. So we try to bring several groups of kids up to these areas to have them experience that the connection and the importance and the significance of those white bark pine trees. So this is it, right? Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And I mean, just like I've heard, there's a lot of people that, I mean, we don't do this on our own. We're not by ourselves. We don't get this done by ourselves. We bring in a lot of people, a lot of smart people, and good, just like you guys. I mean, a lot of work goes into this. And our elders and our babies, our young ones. That's Stephen Small Salmon, and what was her name? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget. Piper. Her name is Piper. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I appreciate you listening, and I am open for questions. However, I'm going to have to jump off. I've got 2 minutes to get out of the building, but I'll be back on. I'm going to join back up with my phone, and then I'll join you in a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike, and look out for those mops on the way out.
Yeah.
And we'll welcome you back in a few minutes. But meantime, we are going to transition over to Adam, who's going to give us our next presentation. And then when he's wrapped up and we're all back together, we will have time for questions and comments. And you know what, I have a comment even now looking at this picture. Twin Peaks, that's all I can say. That's Twin, right? Isn't that from the opening of the show Twin Peaks?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, thank you, Adam. Go for it.
All right, sorry, I'm not much of a public speaker. I'm not really super excited about public speaking or anything. Kind of more of a thinker than a talker. Thank you, SDSU, Corey, Giorgio, Shasta, Selena, and all the people who shared wisdom before me. I'm always inspired by everybody's wisdom. Yeah. I also need to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to stress about presenting here online this afternoon, rather than stressing about the water or food security issues, family health, or hostile forces directly harming any community, my community, your community. Thank you everyone who is protecting our resources, whatever they may be. I'm not just, I don't know, super excited about public speaking, but I appreciate everybody taking the time, maybe get some coffee and listen up while I my name is Adam Osbekoff. I'm Aleut, born and raised in Washington State. I currently live in Washington, Olympia, Washington, where my little family and I are trying to create a small farm or garden on just about 1/3 of an acre. I hesitate to say that it's going to be a farm because we don't have any real plans for any type of animals. For the last 2.5 years, we've planted a multitude of fruit and nut trees, lots of berry trees, blueberry trees mostly, but they're an evergreen blueberry. And not just for food, but also a privacy hedge and water. They drink a lot of water. So we have numerous raspberry plants, goji berries, strawberry plants, clumping bamboo. We've installed multiple herb spaces. We've started a greenhouse and removed almost all the grass on that 1/3 acre. trying to become more sustainable in our attempts to become more sustainable. We've also insulated our 1930 house, sub 800 square feet, and replaced all the old appliances with energy efficient appliances, added an energy efficient heat pump, a solar tube for natural passive lighting. We've re-roofed our house using metal roofing, which reduces the contaminants leaching off our roof and into the environment. We tore down our old garage and replaced it with a smaller garage built out of structural insulated panels. We did this ourselves just to reduce the size and the amount of impervious surfaces on our property. We're in the process of implementing a rain garden, more raised beds, and we'll be adding a medicinal and pollinator garden soon. We have a mason bee like hut, hive, whatever it's called. But I need to study up on the care of bees before we move forward with some mason bees. In the next few years, we plan to open up some walls in our little hut to create a more efficient airflow so that our little heat pump doesn't have to work so hard. We also plan on installing approximately 9 kilowatts of photovoltaics because we own an electric car. We'll also be installing a gray water treatment system that will eventually water our fruit trees and our nut trees during the dry season and contribute to the rain garden during the wet season. We've been working on this for over 2.5 years. It seems like an eternity. We're trying to create a climate change resilient space and trying to just become more, I guess, connected to our foods and place here in Olympia. By now, and the reason why you're here, everyone's familiar with sustainable practices of some sort. It wasn't like sustainability wasn't like that's such a key word when I started my education. I studied sustainable community development with an emphasis in tribal gov and an MPA in tribal gov. Some of the topics I studied were green building strategies, traditional medicinal plants, archaeology, solar design and implementation, dryland permaculture, as well as some topics that just fall underneath tribal administration or just administration in general. When I first started, I was really trying to just find a program that what I thought meant sustainability, and it was I thought I was basing it all on renewable energy. But the more I learned about sustainability, I started to bounce around from college to college trying to find a program that was more or had a more holistic program for sustainable development. I found programs like sustainable agriculture, sustainable economics, and sustainable business management, but had problems finding the perfect program. What I really wanted to learn was just sustainability development or sustainable development. The first class I took that really introduced me to sustainability, and it was actually, I don't remember the exact title, but it was something like sustainability in nature or something like that. And it was an introduction to traditional medicinal plants. And first I was kind of confused because like, what does this have to do with sustainability? Not really having much, I wasn't really in touch with cultural ways or habits or and so I was really trying to find my way in that realm as well. And so I was excited. I'd heard about like the benefits of like herbs and stuff growing up, but I'd never had it presented to me in a way that it was traditional medicinal medicine, and it was straight out of our environment, like right next door, right in the woods that I used to play in. After taking some classes there, I eventually focused on some water issues and realized that I was actually a horrible person because I waste a lot of water on a daily basis. And so I dabbled in that for a while. And then after I focused on water issues, I decided that I wanted to go into like look at some solar design. courses, and I actually did that down in Farmington, New Mexico. And I was going to take some classes, and my goal was to design and sell off-grid PV systems for homes. And, after 2 installations, one was a photovoltaic and the other one was a solar hot water evacuated tube system. I decided that I didn't want to spend all my time up on roofs in various weather conditions. And so I kind of decided that maybe just design or sell. I wasn't really sure. And so I then started looking at permaculture and green building design with the idea. Again, I thought maybe, well, I'll go into creating and designing off-grid homes, the whole package, and it could be a DIY complete home package for people to just set up out in the woods or in the fields, wherever they found it too difficult to bring power, water. And then I finished up with Tribal Gov in my undergraduate, moved on to study an MPA in Tribal Gov. I currently work for and I now work for the Snoqualmie Indian Tribes Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. My title is Cultural Resource Compliance Manager. In my position, I'm tasked to help preserve cultural resources during the development process, usually in the built environment. I manage 2 archaeological technicians, and I also review both internal and external policies, generally related to cultural resources, but sometimes just like CPA, NEPA type stuff. I started work for the tribe back in 2008. I was hired initially to be the air quality intern. It was a placeholder for the climate change person in the tribe. Shortly after I was hired, the gentleman that hired me moved on to other things. And so then I just started doing a multitude of things for the tribe. I worked in the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources for many years. Multiple positions like the air quality intern, the solid waste analyst. I was an energy auditor and a cultural technician for the Environmental and Natural Resource Department. And in 2011, I believe, I transferred to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, where I work now. The Snoqualmie tribe is a signatory of the 1855 Point Elliott Treaty, and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe also lost federal recognition in 1953, meaning that they were all of a sudden no longer a tribe according to the federal government, which it's hard to comprehend that a group of people can call another group of people basically non-existent. In 1999, the federal government reversed their determination once again, and the Snoqualmie people became a federally recognized tribe. The Snoqualmie Indian tribe has also another distinction of not being a signatory of the Indian Reorganization Act, or IRA, of 1934. I suspect the goal of that act was to diminish the federal government's treaty obligations to tribes, kind of saying like, you can do this yourself, we'll stop giving you financial aid because you got this covered, you guys can do it. But also in the same thing, it made self-determination more of a reality. According to the federal government's own constitution, the treaties are law of the land, and the federal government has broken every single treaty ever created with tribes. But I am here to discuss sustainability and how it contributes to a deeper level of sovereignty, self-determination, all while combating climate change. I believe almost everything I'm about to discuss has already been discussed or mentioned by previous speakers, but it's all kind of maybe just in a different tone and a different way of saying it. I also am a person that kind of appreciates the hard definition of things when I'm thinking about stuff. I'll go and look up definitions all the time, and I might forget it like moments later, but nonetheless, I look them up, and these definitions I'll be reading them while speaking about some key points. Sustainability development. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's like traditional ecological knowledge. This should be a foundation aspect of community development. And without our traditional knowledge and knowledge of space and place, I guess we're just kind of, I don't know how else to say it, but in my terms, a townie, somebody that, urbanite, I guess, dominant society. So with that in mind, it brings us to the seventh generation concept. And when I think about the seventh generations and my actions, I fall short. My actions impact the lives of many people, and it's not just in my immediate area, but across the globe. From my purchasing habits of plastics, fast fashion, e-waste, a single-use item, how are other lives impacted globally? They have more lax labor laws and policies. They're less stringent environmental laws. So their environment, their homes are contaminated. We can point our fingers at the other countries polluting the world, but I'm just as much to blame as any of them. We've just exported our environmental degradation to developing countries. My part in the system affects many people, and it contributes to climate change. And to really, I guess, it's with the understanding that we need to really think about reducing, reusing, repurposing, recycling, because it's a key offset to the damages we're creating for our future generations. Next kind of a word topic is sovereignty, which is the supreme power or authority. And tribes are sovereign nations, and the ability to self-govern one's own nation, in this case, the supreme authority over their lands, would be creating policies in a form that exercises their sovereignty. Creating policies that reflect a community's culture and goals is paramount. One of the favorite examples of writing policies to take federal or state environmental policy and make it more stringent or harder to create variances so that maybe they can't build 10 feet closer to that wetland. They can't fill that wetland because the wetlands are kidneys, right? Trees are our lungs. And tribes, another thing that tribes could do to exercise their sovereignty would be to sign the Paris Agreement if they haven't already, or create maybe some sort of similar document that would, through tribes, just make tribes' sovereignty and policies, even under it, that much stronger. The main issue is kind of like implementation enforcement. This might cause a lot of legal issues in courts, not only with the local community, but states and federal governments. But ideally, if tribes work together as hard as they did for like the fishing right, their fishing rights, or economic development rights, as in casinos, I think that we could do a lot. Flexing another sovereignty muscle, and sometimes tribes often do, is include intellectual property law. This could protect the exploited traditional ecological knowledge. It's a constant battle between like shameless profiteers and practitioners. And we can't look to dominant society to fix our nations. We have to do our best and become self-sufficient in a way that we're not always worrying about the federal government's next, I guess, group of people, whoever it happens to be, whatever their agenda is. I'll mention some food sovereignty, the right of people to healthy and cultural appropriated food produced through ecological, sound, and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food agricultural systems. Again, we can go back to TEK, or traditional ecological knowledge, and it should be the foundation when creating the food systems that, or enhancing food systems that actually already exist. But also creating a healthy food system can reduce food deserts. It's key for healthy communities. For example, we can grow food and not lawns. It's kind of a hashtag thing just nowadays, but it's a really valid point. This could reduce food deserts, wasting water on just grass, create access to traditional medicinal food gardens, keep money in our communities, reduce health issues related to diet, and hopefully extend the life expectancy of our communities. A farm-to-table type program for schools, which include traditional foods and medicines, could be the seed that inspires the youth and saves a person's life. Here are a few other ideas. Create a community-supported agricultural program, or CSA. I've recently been kind of looking into like greening deserts, where they take a arid area and start planting different types of plants, and it helps retain water. You can plant, there's a gentleman in Arizona that's planted over like 250 trees, I think, in his yard, just outside of Phoenix, or within Phoenix boundaries. And he has a stream and everything on his property. Sorry, I don't have the name or the link to his page. I guess the issue would be if you have plants that are invasive, that might be kind of a sticking point, or something we need to worry about. We can, and again, it's also hard to eat our traditional foods and our traditional diets. No matter, it doesn't matter where you're from, and we can utilize other spaces with sustainable practices like rooftop gardens. These are spaces that are underutilized for food production. And if we were to use a rooftop garden, we could be what they call stacking functions, or which would keep, the roof would keep you dry. You'd be growing food and cleaning the water that runs off, giving someone who may need the water access to that water through water storage, or maybe it adds to another rain garden. And all in all, it just, again, it reduces our carbon footprint, keeps our food local, and we know where it comes from, and hopefully it's a non-GMO food. Energy sovereignty. This is the right of conscious individuals, communities, and people to make their own decisions on energy generation, distribution, and consumption in a way that is appropriate with their ecological, social, and cultural circumstances, provided that they do not affect others negatively. So currently, we have a centralized system. There's all kinds of different ways that power is produced. Through decentralizing the electrical grid, we can provide on-site power production, reducing the amount of energy loss and money flow out of the community to global conglomerates that have no real stake in our communities besides profiting. Where it's feasible, step away from fossil fuels. We know that in some communities, people make their livelihoods working in the fossil fuel industry to support their families. But at the same time, you know that some of these coal plants and stuff are laying waste to our environment in so many different ways, making people sick. There's other alternatives, like the Tulalip tribe here in Washington State. They're using a biodigester to create and sell electricity. The Yakima Power Company, they operate some solar and maintain and manage electrical systems. So this would also create jobs, and it educates people in their communities, all while keeping the money from bleeding out to the global conglomerates, people that have no interest in your community. Possibly we can place solar on every existing structure, solar covered parking lots using bifacial solar panels where the sun hits the top of the panel, creating energy. And then the light is allowed to shine through the panel and reflect back to the underside of the panel to produce more efficient power. Utilize vertical axis wind turbines, maybe on north side of buildings or north, just where they're not creating shade is why I say north side, if you're attaching the solar panels or something. Light poles, power poles, along freeways, anywhere there's lots of wind, and they come in all kinds of various sizes. There's also Portland, Oregon. They've done a pretty cool thing where they use a water turbine in their drinking water conveyance system to generate electricity. And everything really comes down to energy efficiency. It's truly key. The less energy or electricity we use, the less we need to produce. So again, the energy efficiency is ultimately kind of the goal. These are all examples, and none of them are meant to be like a silver bullet, but they should all be used simultaneously utilized to help alleviate any one type of generation. Again, it's kind of like stacking functions. If you lose one type of power, you have another power source there to generate some electricity. Sustainable infrastructure can also help create autonomy and self-determination while reducing carbon footprints and reducing our contribution to climate change. This also could reduce dependency from outside sources and create an energy security, also reducing our carbon footprint. Religious and cultural sovereignty. Our inherent right is to use our values, traditions, and spirituality to protect our future. There was an act called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978 that protects the rights of Native Americans to exercise their traditional religions by ensuring access to sites, use and possession of sacred objects, and the freedom to worship through ceremonials and traditional rites. These two elements are key to who we are. Passive assimilation is encroaching at a rapid pace, which is due to a forced assimilation that happens in our not so distant past. Our ability to exist as a distinct group of people stems from geographic locations, timelines, and cultural practices, which are still practiced today. Through the act of religious and cultural sovereignty, we can protect our sacred places and resources from mining, transmission of energy or goods, or even sometimes just recreational degradation. And the underlying theme, again, is traditional ecological knowledge. Tribes have lost access at times to traditional gathering areas due to conservation groups trying to protect the very resource tribes utilize since time immemorial. Working with tribes prior to land designation is key. People like the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or TIPO, cultural departments, and other natural resource departments within the tribe should be consulted before making any land designations. It just kind of goes back to sovereignty. Everybody wants to be recognized and heard. And then we have economic sovereignty, ability to impose rules of appropriation, exchanges, and uses of resources. communities need to reduce the amount of money leaving that community. Our communities need to reduce that. And I don't know how do we do that. I don't know, have all the answers, but maybe create business opportunities that that community itself uses. Maybe an example would be infrastructure companies. Maybe it's a company that maintains roads. I'm sure everybody has a road that runs through their community, and maybe that construction company is tribally owned and they can maintain their own roads. Get federal funding, state funding to do those projects, and while being sensitive to the cultural resources that may and natural resources that may be in the path of that road or transmission line. Another opportunity for green infrastructure would be a green home construction company, electrical production or transmission and maintenance, water treatment and management, engineers, technical staff. All these things can employ all these different types of individuals. And the list is endless with creating your own economy. And also keeping the profits within the community. We can't make people care or take action. Hopefully someone with words of wisdom will inspire you to action, and you will inspire others to action with your actions and your words. I'm guilty of contributing to climate change because I'm a consumer and talk is cheap. I waste water, I waste food. I drive a large pickup truck that guzzles fossil fuels, and I justified that by trading in a plug-in hybrid so that I can haul dirt, rock, lumber, and stuff while I do my home improvements or whatever you want to call them. And the fossil fuels were extracted and processed in other communities, polluting through the whole process. And I also drive an electric car, hopefully to offset that gas guzzler, but there's precious metals that are harvested and processed in different communities, polluting again throughout the whole process. I use single-use items on a regular basis. I have a lot of excuses that justify my consumption and lifestyle choices. These excuses do not help fight climate change, but I can do better. I will do better. And that's pretty much it. I apologize for the disjointed presentation, but I appreciate everyone taking the time out to listen.
Thank you, Adam. You gave me so many things to think about, and I deeply appreciate your focus on sovereignty, which is not really something we had talked much about in the previous two sessions. And before we open it up for discussion, I wanted to give Giorgio a quick opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Adam. Both those talks, I think, were, using your term, Adam, inspiring. And I think that idea of inspiration is really important. And part of the reason, as we talked about the previous 2 days, these talks were even occurring, is to provide challenges to the future climate scientists, the current climate scientists, about there's many more systems, there's many more ways, there's many more wisdoms and knowledges out there than what limited scientific, sort of dominant scientific methods can explain or even understand. And this challenge to scientists, I need to now turn to Corey Monteverde, who put this whole thing together. And it's not about us, but I think in a sense, we have to talk about last year. Corey reached out to all the faculty and I raised a question, and this, I get zero credit. I mean that 100%. I just raised a question to Corey, are you including any Indigenous perspectives? And Corey took that challenge on her own. She made sure that last year, one day was dedicated to Indigenous perspectives. She came back this year on her own and said, I want to do something where the entire climate talk is about Indigenous wisdom and perspectives. Corey is a climate modeler, a climate scientist, and she has challenged herself, and she's brought this challenge to all of us, and all of this wisdom and insights that have been shared by everybody, the speakers the past 3 days. And so I just think Corey deserves a lot of credit for this, and she's shaking her head. Selena asked me to do this, and I said I'd do my best to embarrass you. So hopefully I'm embarrassing you a little. So with that, I'm going to stop embarrassing you, but you truly do deserve a lot of credit. And I think you should be an inspiration to all the people with 2 letters in front of their name, behind their name, 3 letters behind their name, who think they're educated because of those letters. I think what we've learned these last 3 days is there's a whole lot we don't know.
Well, Giorgio, quick comment, no clapping. I don't deserve any credit. Like, this is not me. This is not done by me. This is a platform for perspectives that we are not given in our normal classroom settings. This is to give a voice to those who have been ignored. And I say ignored in the sense that I have never learned from these perspectives ever in my, 10 years of education past high school. So this is the first time I'm encountering these perspectives, and this is all about their voices and their stories. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the recognition, but this is not done by me. This is for their perspectives, their wisdom, their stories. And I am just blessed to be here and to hear all of their wisdom. So thank you.
Well, I'll briefly pile onto the Mutual Admiration Society just by saying that, we are all honored, I think, to be a part of this. And I know that I have learned so much, and it's been so wonderful for me to spend this time. And I'm really lucky that I already knew some of these folks and have benefited from them. And now I hope that I have, new friends and colleagues that I can reach out to. But Corey and the Graduate Student Association made this possible. So it's okay to acknowledge that you did a thing. You did a thing and you did it well. But we do have a good hour left for us to have conversation, and almost everybody from the last 3 days is with us today. So I'm hoping that we can expand the discussion to include everybody. But I'm going to start with a few questions directly for our speakers that we featured today. And Mike, it looks like you are back with us. And I have a question for you that's actually very specific. You showed a slide that talked about doing the genetic testing on the white bark pine. And I was wondering if you could explain what it is you're testing for and what you hope to do with that information.
Well, thanks, Shasta. I'm trying to get situated here. So in a process of looking for, we call them plus trees. They're healthy trees. They're resilient trees that have actually survived pine beetle infestations and blister rust, which is a fungus that attacks the trees. We look for we call them plus trees. Those trees are healthy. They're resilient. So we're looking for those seeds from those trees. Once we gather those seeds, we send them to the lab, the Forest Service lab in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to get genetically tested and go through some, I don't know, I'm not a forester, so I don't know the whole process behind it. But yeah.
That's great. And I think that's something for the future climate scientists here to be thinking about, that's certainly something we need to consider as we do that BS thing, which is adapting to climate change. But so something I observed today with both Mike and Adam is that you both work for the cultural resource departments of tribes. I myself am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Environmental Director for a tribe. And isn't it interesting that here we are as, specialists in tribal cultural resources, and yet we're talking about climate change. So, Adam, when you talked about your background and all of the different things that you studied, you have all these diverse things that have come together to bring you where you are today. So, I was hoping you could expand a little bit on how all of those different experiences led you to where you are, and how the cultural resources part connects to the climate piece.
Well, just curiosity really is the biggest final step. Is I happened to be walking by I was taking classes. I just started my the program in tribal administration. I walked by the Snoqualmie tribal headquarters and just happened to peek my head in just to ask them what they were doing with sustainability. And they told me to go and talk to the Environmental Natural Resource Department. And me being me, I was like, I didn't want to bother them. And then I was ushered upstairs to talk to the environmental department. And then after talking to the director at the time and talking to him about my background, he wanted to hire me as the climate change. I'm not really sure the exact title. I don't even think we had a title yet. But at that point, I was just kind of hired and turned into the air quality intern. So then I started working on air quality issues and thinking about we're this close to the freeway. How many particulates per million do we allow to be transferred to the tribal lands? The Snoqualmie tribe is kind of interesting because they did lose their recognition and they had to buy their own reservation. And in, I think it was 2001, they started the construction, or maybe even finalized I think they started the construction of their casino on land that they had just recently purchased. Anyway, I forget all the dates. But climate change is a thing, and it doesn't matter who you are, what you believe, whether you're a denier or somebody that accepts it. It's something that affects just our environment. And obviously we get a lot of our plants and ceremony and stuff from different environmental places and spaces, from rivers to the ground to one of the things that I deal with is erosion. We deal with erosion up in Alaska. They deal with a lot of erosion and everywhere really, but their whole communities are sliding into either rivers or the ocean. To think about our culture, how I don't see how we can ignore climate change. It doesn't matter what people, again, believe or disagree with. It's just climate change is here. And I worry about, even with all the little things that I'm trying to do at my house, how is that going to affect next year, the following year? I don't have a great answer, I'm sorry, but every year is going to change, and I may not have water next year. I may not have, or it may get too much water next year, but I'm trying to prepare for climate change, and I hope that other people do the same.
No, and I think that is a good answer, because you're right. So the climate affects everything. And I found myself taking notes as you were talking about the things you've done at your house. And you made a really great point too about how essentially there are opportunities for tribal communities in the so-called green economy, that we could have solar panel manufacturing as a tribal economic development strategy, or finding funding new pathways to clean water, or just other methods that can generate revenues for tribes that aren't dependent on gaming, which we know is not possible for a lot of tribes because they're not in an area where there's a client base, customers who are going to come to a casino. But also, as you mentioned, there are people, and that includes tribes, who rely on fossil fuel extraction to support their economy. And all of that ties into your message about sovereignty. So I'm going to put that as a broad question, not just to you, but to all of our panelists from the last 2 days and today. And Dr. Merrick Martinez has been able to join us as well. And that is, again, the question of sovereignty. For any of you, how do you think that tribal sovereignty can be leveraged in the fight against climate change? And I see that Edward's approaching the computer, so. Are you unmuting, Edward? No. Like, yeah, I don't want to take that one.
I'll pass, but I want to come back to it.
Okay. Mike, how about you? Do you have any thoughts about sovereignty and climate change?
Oh, well, I've been doing this for a little while, and it seems to me that, people are actually starting to listen to what we have to say. It's not just sovereignty, but it's our own traditions and customs and our cultures. I've heard several people talk about TEK. TEK was kind of a buzzword, right? About 10 years ago or so, when I was, I shared earlier that I was the co-chair on the National Tribal Science Council. And we actually had a meeting in DC where we went to the Longhouse of the Onondagas with Chief Orrin Lyons and the elders there, and they talked about the importance of being self-sufficient, being sovereign nation, and being able to, we talked about food sovereignty, and we're not truly sovereign, in my opinion, until we are food sovereign, until we can sustain ourselves. Lemons, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And that makes me think about personal sovereignty in a way, which in Adam, it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing in creating the ability for people to be like off grid and be self-sufficient, that's almost a kind of personal sovereignty. James, how about you? Do you have any thoughts about sovereignty and the climate fight?
Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you again. I apologize for not being on video. I'm having a bad hair day. No offense, Giorgio. I do think that it's a great question, and I think that in terms of combating climate change, as the question is, I do think that we have lessons from our past in terms of how our elders really worked hard to support our tribes in terms of fighting for our rights. I think this exploration of rights-based solutions is an important one. I also think that because of our unique status, I think we've taken the lead on many different climate action projects. I'm appreciative of Mike Durglo and all they're doing up there at Salish. They've when states and feds, were resistant to climate change adaptation planning, tribes were taking the lead. And I think that their actions to do that really is based on really our view of who we are and that we have to do these things. So I do think that's an example of tribal nations really exercising their sovereignty and really thinking and really working with everybody to understand what that might mean. Also, I think, in terms of climate change, we see in our friends in the Southwest, we know that water rights is going to be a big one, if not already. And I think, you know, with these increasing mega droughts and droughts happening in the West, you know, tribes and their assertion of tribal water rights is going to be key. And I think that in order to do that, you know, we're going to have to exercise our sovereignty, and we're going to have to apply all those policies and agreements and the decisions that have been made for all many years. And I think that that's also be a part of, I think, what needs to be done. Again, I think that, you know, in terms of looking at solutions, you know, I was in a discussion yesterday, and there we were talking about, again, about the whole carbon market in terms of a mitigation to climate change. And, you know, tribes may have an opportunity to get involved in carbon marketing as a response to climate change. But again, that's going to be up to the tribes. And if tribes have that unique status, then they could maybe, you know, develop those sort of less carbon economies, and really being think about how, you know, how we look at the land, and how, you know, how our land management, how our land use planning is really going to take effect. And so in some ways, those are some examples I think about when we talk about sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And I won't put anybody else on the spot at this point. I will just ask if any of the other panelists have anything to say about that topic. Yeah, okay, go for it, Edward.
Okay, I just needed a moment to catch my breath, and thank you. Thank you again, everyone. And Adam, I took a lot of notes. I wish I was your neighbor. In terms of answering the question, tribal sovereignty leveraging over this, you know, climate change issue, I think for one, we can stand up and say, "I told you so." You know, that's what we've been harping about for the last 100 years, and so on. And in my presentation a couple of days ago, we saw it coming. We saw the climate degradation before climate change was coined. So that's how far ahead we were. And so at this point, we have to push for policy. We have to find accountability to the present policies. I know with the state of New Mexico, state of Arizona, the water laws are not going to change. I mean, we can challenge, for example, Arizona. During the water rights negotiations in Arizona, we were stuck with ancient laws, and it wasn't to our advantage. And so, you know, on the New Mexico side, our reservation is on both Arizona and New Mexico side. And in New Mexico side, there's so much wells going up just outside, immediately outside the Zuni reservation. And so there's more groundwater withdrawal than within the reservation. And so we can see this, and it's not going to change unless the state starts working with us. Yesterday, we talked about the UN DRIP. It's a good tool. However, it doesn't have any teeth. I talked about the Evo Morales, who made it their national law in Bolivia. But, you know, 12 plus years later, a different kind of peoples, they basically had a successful coup d'etat, and Evo Morales was moved, and the UN DRIP didn't have any teeth at all to help Evo Morales. He had to flee the country of Bolivia to find safety. And so my point here is that the laws, again, aren't working for Indigenous peoples. They don't have teeth to support our standing. And thank you, Adam, for reminding us what laws are in place, but really, do they have the teeth? And so we're talking about local governments, we're talking about state governments, federal governments, international laws. Not very many of them have the teeth. And in Giorgio's opening, he touched upon that. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And again, unfortunately, it's not a democratic system. It's whoever is in the White House. I mean, we're hooping and hollering about our president. And in the next 2.5 years, is that all going to change again? And so we're dealing with the ebb and flows of the White House government. And so right now we're having conversations about policy changes. I was on a Zoom conference a few months ago talking about policy changes and introducing new instruments. But will these new instruments make a difference in 2 or 3 years? That's the reality that we're in. In the reservation, we're dealing with our own local government issues. So the other level is, what do we mean by carbon economy? What do we mean by carbon sequestration? What do they all mean? There's a percentage of people that say that carbon sequestration, carbon marketing is good. But as Indigenous peoples, I don't think it's good, because, what does it really mean? Yes, I'm going to take a risk here. My tribe, they jumped on board. They have a resolution supporting carbon marketing, carbon sequestration. My personal opinion, and based on my training with other Indigenous organizations, with other grassroots organizations, with other Indigenous activists, it's not good, because basically it's like getting credit to say we're not going to do any mining or forest removal here, but we will get enough credits, we'll go someplace else and we'll damage that system. We can go back several years, in fact, and we can talk about REDD, R-E-D-D. REDD, yes, it sounds good, but for those of our brothers and sisters to the south who signed on it, they shot themselves in the foot. They're part of this protecting the Amazon jungle, but they didn't realize that they cannot be part of that Amazon jungle once they sign on with this agreement. And so we really have to educate ourselves and our local governments and other Indigenous circles to really challenge what these new definitions are. Will they work for us, or will they hurt us? And so it's really not the English language that's really the problem. It's how the English language, how the laws are being interpreted. And again, I don't want to be the one that is ruffling the feathers of government organizations or the corporate power, but at our level, we're really feeling the underground effects of climate change. We're missing our river. We've been without our river for 20, 30 plus years. And I said, a loss of river that support our community, our gardens, our livestock. When a river is lost, it says everything. That's where I'm coming from. If there were supermarkets, we're already climate refugees because we don't have any water to be independent. 200 years ago, we were independent. Not today. Outside the reservation, our watershed has been taken away. The underground water has been severely minimized. And so I think this is, if there's anything about this forum, is to say to the world, as a Pueblo man, on behalf of my Pueblo people, I'm saying that a lot of our natural resources have benefited people that came to this area in the recent years. For those of us who have deep roots, our roots are really being challenged. That's where I'm coming from. And so we have to really examine these laws. We have to really examine these new phrases. Carbon sequestration. Is it good or is it bad? I want to leave that on the table for maybe another time to discuss it further. But again, these new mechanisms, yes, they may work, they may not. And Giorgio, thank you for making the point that what do the laws mean? Are they working or are they not? Who's going to hold the government officials? Who's going to hold the nation's leaders responsible? If there are any teeth to these laws, then it's the responsive, again, here I'm putting the responsibility on the graduate students. Who's going to do the investigations to make sure that there are teeth included with these new laws that are being adopted? And this is coming from my heart. It's not coming from any mental anguish, but it's coming from my heart. I'm trying to be neutral about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And, that actually is perfect because we had a question come in while you were speaking, and it has to do with things like that and the importance or the responsibility of the 1%. So, and the questioner says she thinks it was Tino who brought up the fact that to make change in regard to climate, we need the 1%, or those with the economic power, which is also political power, to care and invest and start making changes. And so, on the basis of everything that we've heard over the last 3 days, what do we do, or do we have any thoughts about how we can get those people with the power to take on the challenge of industrial-induced climate change? How do we get those folks to understand that this is so important? I guess if I had the answer to that, I'd be nominating myself for the Nobel Prize. But if any of you have any ideas, and also Giorgio, you might want to respond to some of this as well. So I'll open that to you.
So I wanted to provide a little bit of the context when we're talking about TEK. And there's a very wonderful document up on the web by the Curti tribe in Northern California. And one of the things that is stressed is that TEK, traditional knowledge, local knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, whatever terms, right? We don't want to confuse words and ideas and things. It's fundamental that when Western scientists engage this, related to what Edward was talking about, who's going to make the difference? What's the responsibility? That they're not gap fill measures. You don't just take what you want from TEK that works for you in that moment and walk away. It's our responsibilities, if we're going to learn and have the honor of being allowed to be taught these ways, that we need to understand, using Edward's term again, this is based on a cosmovision, on a cosmology, on a worldview. Aura showed yesterday the Dene worldview and how it comes together. Edward has talked about the worldview. Michael showed a different model, the Salish worldview. These are holistic systems. This is not just science as a function. It's far more than science. Aura and I were actually talking about this yesterday, where Indigenous systems have both a philosophy connecting up the chaos of the universe instantaneously, but also a way of slowing it down through the methodologies like Edward talked about with the cattails on the rivers. Western science is very often just functives. How do things work? But there's also stories that go along with that, but then we want to deny those stories. Oh, we have a naive realism. So going back to what Edward's talking about we told you so. I think there's two ways to understand we told you so or I told you so. One could be egotistical, recognize I'm right. The other could be we were right then, so you better start listening to us now. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that with what all the speakers have been talking about. Edward and Tino, Aura and James, Michael and Adam. There's all of these different elements. And, you know, pulling from the wisdom of my mother's people, namely Khalil Gibran, perplexity is the beginning of knowledge. And we need to be perplexed. We need to understand that there's infinitely more ways to understand what's causing climate change and how we can go about working towards solving some of these problems collectively. And to the question of the 1%, that becomes a question of what their cosmovision is, what their worldview is. And there's a politics there. And, you know, I'll leave it with one of my favorite philosophers, Spinoza, that the tyrant can only rule as long as the multitude allows the tyrant to rule. So yesterday, someone said, we're all in this together. And that's what we need to do, is be the 99% working against that 1%.
Well, I am now so perplexed that I must be a genius by now. No, thank you for that, Giorgio, and for bringing in the TEK aspect of it, which also relates to a question that Adam brings up. So if we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, first of all, there's a whole nother question I was going to ask about that, which is the difference between TEK, or some of my tribal colleagues have said, let's call it tribal scientific knowledge, because it is science, it's tribal science. But then I've had other people push back and say, but we don't want to call it science because it's distinguished from, you know, the Western idea of science. We don't want that to get confused. But in some of my work, I've run across folks, and I'm thinking specifically in this instance of the Yurok people, who have designated parts of what the Western scientific world would call nature as living entities, as non-human relatives. And so the Yurok people passed an ordinance in which they declared that the Klamath River has personhood. And because the Klamath River has personhood, it has rights. It has human rights. And I believe it was one of our speakers earlier this week was talking about that. And also, I think it was either Australia or New Zealand, where that same thing has been done, where personhood has been given to the natural world. So is that something we should be considering as we push forward in changing views about our place in the world? How do we designate living things, non-human living things, as having the same rights and privileges that the human does? Maybe I should put that question in a different way. How do we, the way Adam put it, how do we designate a river or a landscape as a living entity? And Aura, if you're around, maybe I'll put you on the spotlight for that one.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate the knowledge that was shared previously. You know, I just want to say to Edward for his knowledge and what he said, because I mean, it brought up a lot in my heart, in my mind as well, about these kind of the settler colonial kind of framework, right, at play that we haven't really talked about it. And so, like, the way the laws are set up and who it benefits and who created those laws. And in my work as the TIPO, right, how different policies and regulations were adhered to, or they were sort of shaded in a way that benefited the agency as opposed to like tribal members. And so I think we have to be very careful when we adopt some of these Western ways. I mean, we know within every inch of our being who we're related to. We understand that everything is living and we have a relationship with everything around us, right? When we say our prayers, when we're taught our prayers, that's what we're taught. And so for us as Indigenous peoples, I think that's something that's just inherent in how we understand our relationship. But I think the other part is we have to be careful with, like, I think it was Audre Lorde, right? You can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. And so there's a bit of trickery there when we utilize those kinds of systems to try to protect what's important to us. And I think that's something that we have to think about in teaching and in creating allies with students is, how do we go about teaching that kind of knowledge and that kind of feeling without people growing up without, and understanding that relationship and or being taught protocol to know what that means. But also, when we think about how we protect the landscape with the laws that are established and that we have now, it's tricky. And as Indigenous peoples, we're always on the losing end of those kinds of investigations. And I've seen it time in and time out here in the Southwest with these EIS statements and, EAs and things of that nature, where our concerns were put in a little category on the side as an alternative or a potential. And yet our elders, our knowledge holders, are pouring their hearts out to speak about how important these places are. And then when it comes down to it, it's just chucked into a box, right? And that's a damaging process. But I think in teaching these students and these next generations, like, just hearing, from all of the other panelists, it's been eye-opening and amazing to me, and I've learned so much. And so it's provided me with new insights and how to think through these things. So I think, again, having caution and understanding how historically those have been tools used to dispossess us of our access and our rights to these places, and to collect and to, be there and perform in ceremony and connect in those ways. So I don't know if that answered or complicated, but I am also perplexed. So like that is the first step.
Well, so I thank you for that, and I want to observe how interesting it is that we find that sometimes we want to apologize for our answers, and I don't think we should ever apologize for our answers. It's all knowledge. It's all meant in the spirit of sharing, and also that we've been talking a lot about the youth and how the young people are the ones that are going to be carrying this work forward. But somebody has to teach the youth, and the youth also teach us. So our elders, our teachers, and we may be blessed with having those moments to teach as well. And that makes me think of what Mike was talking about or showing in some of his slides with the little young people, those youth. And so, Mike, can you comment on the role of educating our youngest people, our little ones that aren't even, 2 digits yet? And what has that meant for you to be able to work with those kids? You might be muted, Mike. There you are.
Well, I mean, just passing on our knowledge. And, I've shared before that the knowledge that I carry is not my knowledge. We just finished a chapter in a book called Climate Solutions, and part of that, what I shared earlier, that presentation, is our chapter in the book, and the biocultural restoration of white bark pine. And those seeds that we are growing now, hopefully someday can feed our young people, and just getting them involved. And I've always tried to advocate. I mean, just going through school and being in the role I'm in now, just like you. I mean, you're the TIPO. I'm not the TIPO. I'm the department head. So, but just trying to help people understand that we do have a living culture, and that knowledge that we have has to be passed on to our children and our grandchildren. we put together a program called Eagles. I think I told you about that before, Shasta. It's Environmental Advocates for Global and Local Ecological Sustainability. And that whole idea was to get the youth involved in our climate change action. And that program, I kind of felt like, you know, I want this to be my legacy. I want my great-grandchildren to say, my papa started this. And I, you know, kind of jokingly said, oh, I don't want a street or a housing unit or a office space named after me. I want my great-grandchildren to say, you know what? My papa started this, and this is why we're doing it. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Let me just say on a personal note that I'm very grateful to all of you who have children. I don't have kids of my own because I was scared. Kids are scary. But if you have children, you have engaged in an act of tremendous hope and faith. And thank you for doing that, so that cowards like me can be glad that there's people bringing up good kids in the world, you know. And I'm sure, Mike, that your grandkids are gonna say, "Papa did that."
Well, I got a couple extras I'll send your way, Shasta.
As long as they're willing to help clean the cat box, then that sounds great. I'll take them.
All right.
And I know Tino is still with us too. So Tino, I wanted to give you that opportunity to circle back to that 1% question. You know, how do we challenge the powerful to do the right thing? And if that wasn't something that you had brought up, you know, too bad, you have to answer anyway.
Interesting question. I don't, you know, like you said, there's no real answer for it, but I think we have a real opportune time in history, like I was talking about yesterday, with some of the tech money that's been created. You know, there's a lot of wealth out there that you see with, you know, Elon Musk, people like that, and those are numerous, and they're not your typical Rockefellers, right? They're not the ones they're not Henry Ford. They're not heirs to FedEx or something like that. And often these people hold tremendous power and also are a little more open to beliefs that are, you know, maybe more in line with what tribal beliefs would be. And those are gross generalizations, but this might be an opportunity to chip away at some of that wealth and power, and that you know, we're in this weird era of .comers and things like that, and I've noticed that, and I've seen a lot of those. You know, we have Microsoft in our area, and I've seen some of those Microsoft millionaires that are quietly making a difference in things like this. And you've seen, you know, some of the carbon sequestration and things like that, those investments. And like Edward said, is it good or bad? I don't, you know, there's definitely, it's an open question, but there's some more diverse thinking amongst the wealth of that 1%. And if you would allow, I would circle back to a question you just asked a minute ago about the rights of nature and things like that. And this is just my beliefs. Like, if Giorgio can attest that, then I'm absolute realist, right? Like, I'm honest to a fault, and I have a real issue with honesty and things like that. But when it comes to the rights of nature, it's been brought up. It's it's a buzzword. It's all of this. It's all good. And Giorgio said it yesterday, is it has no teeth, and we have to be careful where we invest, right? Like, there's so much we invest in, and that's coming from a person who, you know, in my bio says I'm a lifelong practitioner of nature-based worship. I mean, this is me, right? Like, those things that they have rights, but without instilling those values as a culture, you know, starting at birth, we're losing them in our tribal communities. We're battling the same, you know, tech addiction, things like that, where if you can't Google it, it's not true. And I think all religions are losing that. You know, they're losing that stronghold. And I mean, if you ask me or question something about my allegiance to nature, you know, I would respond simply with it. Do you have an allegiance to Jesus Christ? Things like that, like these things that have been indoctrinated. And it's not meant to be offensive, but it's also a belief system, and it's quantifying that belief system. It's going to be really tough to inject that into mainstream society, right? Like I said, I have a tough time injecting straight nature-based worship that where, you know, we come from the water. We do, you know, these things that I've experienced too much to not believe. I've been in too many situations to not believe what I believe in. And so it's a challenge, and I don't know that it's a worthy fight in terms of like changing global culture, right? I think if we could get some recognition of the importance of preservation of these cultural natural resources, if we can use a platform, but I don't know that, you know, quantifying something in a symbolic sense is the most productive. And I'm open to criticism on that too. I mean, you know, because if somebody wants to pass a resolution that has a symbolic resolution, I understand that. I respect that. I mean no disrespect to anybody, but I think we have to be careful with all the diverse powers ripping, you know, our future apart, where we invest that energy.
Thank you, Tino. And I think that your points are really well taken. And I think for all of us, we all understand what it means when we say that a law doesn't have any teeth, or that a declaration like the UNDRIP doesn't have any teeth. So you're right. I think we need to be cautious about feeling too good about ourselves when we say that something has the same rights as humans if we can't back that up with action. And I'm overstepping my role as the moderator a little bit because I have so many things I could say about this. I'm just going to leave it, or give this brief bit of my experience, which is that when you're a tribal historic preservation officer, your life is about getting responses from agencies that say, well, we understand that this is going to have an unmitigable impact on a cultural resource or a sacred site, or, you know, something that is of importance to the tribe, but the overriding public considerations are allowing us to move forward. And so we're going to put a landfill on your sacred mountain. We're going to put a dam on your river. We're going to relocate or do a phase 3 archaeological investigation on the village site. And then it's no longer destroyed because we've removed everything from the ground and put it in boxes and stuck it on a dark basement shelf in a museum. That is the utter opposite of teeth. You know, destruction is not conservation. Destruction is not protection, I should say. And so I know what that's like, and it's sent me to bed in tears more times than I care to remember. So all of that is really well taken. So I guess then my question becomes, going back to trying to be a moderator, how do we put the teeth? How do we get the teeth into these laws? And I know I'm asking really hard questions, because if we knew the answer to this stuff, we'd be doing it. But we have to find a way to get the agencies, the people with the power, to understand that they're destroying us. They're destroying the world. They're destroying everything. So let me just leave it at that. Giorgio, you're nodding. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting points here. And just right now, pragmatically, what has the teeth are the processes and the procedures. So you slow them down so much and it costs them so much time and money. It's more in their interest to do it the right way than to have to keep spending money through time and procedure. And those of you who I've worked for and with, you know, that's our strategy, and it works sometimes. I think another really interesting point, going back to Adam's question and Monica's question that was based off what Tino had said on the first day about the 1%. It's really interesting, the idea of designating a river or a landscape as a living entity in the US context, because in the US context, life doesn't have that much legal right. Look what's happening to the bodily autonomy of women right now, for example. Let's look at how the term human was used to treat Black people as property and to completely try to erase Indigenous peoples from these lands. What has teeth in this country are private property laws. So that then returns to what we're talking about. How do you make the 1% care? I'm not giving a complete answer, but there's a connection there. If you can privatize, but in the interest of stewards, of traditional stewards, where it's not about privatizing to exploit, to create an economic profit, but in order to live in kinship in a balanced, harmonious way, that might be one pathway. Where, going to what Tino was talking about, he's seen some people with that money do some good things. Again, I'm just thinking pragmatically, not idealistically, but it's just something to think about in that context. But yeah, those are my two kind of moderator additions. So
thanks, Giorgio. Anybody else?
I have a comment about possible platforms. Here in the Northwest in Seattle, there's a football team called the Seattle Seahawks. Some people may know of a chief named Chief Seattle. And then there's all these different people that are part owners of this team. I think that there's an opportunity for the tribes here in Washington, and probably tribes in other areas with other professional teams, to purchase their way into ownership of some of these teams and elevate the platform of which they can discuss these topics and kind of bring them out to dominant cultures. Because I don't know why, but the celebrities get like just a ton of attention. And but my neighbor, you know, if something happens to them, nobody knows. But if something happens to a football player or a celebrity, all of a sudden, you know, everyone's world's upside down. And so if we can kind of, I guess, focus maybe different ways to create platforms, that might be an option or an idea. I'm not really sure if that's going to happen, but it's an opportunity.
I like that idea, and I like the idea of getting that message to people, you know, through something that they're already paying a lot of attention to. I mean, if we want to talk about religion, I would say that football is the closest thing we have to probably the biggest religion in the United States, or soccer or whatever, soccer in the European nations and elsewhere. Do others have thoughts on this question, you know, the 1% in general and teething up the laws?
You know, I think one of the things that we, you know, that we've tried many things at Navajo Nation, lobbying. You know, we have our own office in Washington. They do a lot of work for us, but I think one of the other things is, you know, we have a large land base, and so we've passed our own laws. And as far as, you know, there's sanctions for certain activities. There's permitting issues if there are people who don't comply with our laws. And so, you know, I think, you know, beefing up some of our own tribal codes and regulations is one way to ensure that, at least on our own tribal land, some of those issues are being addressed in a way that is important to us and relevant to our land and our concerns. But I think one of the other sort of things we have to be very strategic about is partnering with different legislators or representatives. One of the things I was able to do while I was at Navajo was to work with Senator Heinrich out of New Mexico on the STOP Act. And I was able to provide insights into how to sort of coalesce all of these concerns, but also different legislation that exists into creating something that would support our concerns and other concerns in order to stop, this sale and transport of our items, right? Our sacred items and items of cultural patrimony, if you will. And so I think there is some utility there with finding key partners. And I also agree with the celebrity status, right? We live in a very different kind of landscape now, if you will, social landscape, and our celebrities do have a lot of weight. And I think having those kinds of key strategic partnerships also helps to uplift voices and concerns. So, you always follow the money trail, and so that could also be another way to sort of raise some of those concerns. And around in the valley, Phoenix Valley, we have a ton of tribal nations that are doing extremely well, and they're purchasing some of the larger sports arenas. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there as a result of their ownership in the downtown Phoenix area. So hopefully we'll see some changes there. But yeah.
I hope so. So we're down to, oh, go. Who is that? Go ahead.
Nasha, this is James. I think a couple of things I'd say is, we need more Indian lawyers. I think we need more Indian lawyers and scholars who can work on at sophisticated levels to really work with the lawyers, the policy aspect of this work. I think we need more scholarship in these areas. And also I think we need to publish. We need more publications of these kind of ideas. And then we think about, I guess, finally, I'd say is that in all this work, I think we look at Deb Holland, and we look at what we have right now, and we just come along and we support her. We figure out ways to support the work she's doing. We all take that responsibility to support the work that she's proposing and those things that are doing right now. And then in all things, we educate. We show up to the meetings. We show up to we write comments. Federal Register stuff. We just got to keep going. And I think when we do that, I think we can make progress. So that's my comments. Thank you.